Yeah, so basically, like right after the elections, a lot of things, like in my perspective, changed. I was at the bus stop just listening to music on my headphones, and a car pulls up, and I was just, being generous, and they were waving at me. So I took off my headphones and asked them, "Do you need help?" And the lady just decided to say, "Go back to Mexico, you fucking immigrant." And I was just like, I'm not, I'm just gonna ignore it. So then I told my parents about it, and my mom was just like, just tell them to have a nice day, because what my dad also like pointed out is that they feel empowered. People that are racist feel empowered because they know they have a president that's racist and discriminates against racists and religious. They feel empowered because they know that he'll have their back, knowing that they're racist and we're not going to be able to do anything about it.
That was Tony, a student at Alta Vista High School in Kansas City, Missouri. He's 18, a junior in high school, and in that anecdote, he was simply trying to catch the bus to go to school. I'm Nathaniel Bozarth, and this is Wide Ruled, Brain Roots' podcast on the past and present of equality in education. On today's episode, I talk with Assistant Principal Devon Teran and two students at Guadalupe Center's Alta Vista High School in Kansas City, Missouri. The students will remain anonymous, one guy and one girl. We'll call the guy Tony and the girl Sarah. And a quick note, the views and opinions stated in this episode belong to the individuals who state them and are not necessarily the views held by Guadalupe Centers. Here's Devon.
At the time, I think there was both a lot of excitement, but also a lot of anxiety for our kids. And our kids were interested in really watching an election in a way that I've not seen students really get into before, partly because they knew the stakes for a lot of them politically.
I don't know what the demographic population of this high school is, but it's majority Hispanic, correct?
Yeah, and when we say majority, we mean over 90%.
Okay.
Over 90% Latino. We don't ask the question how many of our kids are DACA or undocumented. It's irrelevant to us.
Right.
Those questions come up when we're helping kids look for colleges or scholarships. So we get a sense by the end of the year, like what each senior class is like. But everybody knows somebody who is, or has somebody in their family that is, or is themselves, and it's personal.
Okay, so now you have the setup. Eventually, we're going to be talking about the presidential election that took place in November 2016 and the aftermath. But before we get to that, we have to go back to the summer of 2016. Devon's going to talk about some groundwork that he and the administration at Alta Vista laid before they had any idea what exactly they were laying that groundwork for.
My principal and I, we wanted to push our teachers at the beginning of this year to really use circles, just have a classroom meeting on a regular basis. So
a classroom meeting, meaning a teacher with their students.
Yeah, and so just we stop, maybe it's once a week, say we do Tuesday morning, and we kind of spend a few minutes, we all pull into a circle, we talk about how the class is going, reflections, set some goals.
Devon will refer to these circles throughout this episode. As practiced at Alta Vista, circles are an amalgam of restorative justice practices and Anabaptist listening circles. Restorative justice circles involve a culprit and victims talking about their feelings and mutually listening to one another in a safe, mediated space. Anabaptist listening circles are practiced in some Quaker and Mennonite spaces and involve members of a group deeply listening to one another without retort or rebuttal. Both practices lead to participants feeling a deeper connection to their own selves as well as the community surrounding them.
Do that regularly in a positive way, so when something happens, we have that structure to be able to come together and have a safe space for talking with each other. Over the summers we were talking about it, I remember texting Ed, and
Ed's the principal.
Ed's our principal, Ed Mendez, talking to him about the need to be ready for something to happen. I wasn't thinking about the election. I was thinking about, what happens if say we have a police shooting of a black man in Kansas City. Say that happened, we had massive demonstrations in the streets here. Or say we had something like what happened in Florida with the nightclub shooting happen here in Kansas City. These things affect our kids. Like, they know what's going on. I think of when I was in high school, 9/11 happening, or when I was in elementary school, Oklahoma City bombing happening, actually while I was on a school field trip to Oklahoma. And like, you can't pull out a lesson plan for that moment, but the need to like practice, like, how do we stop when something comes up and just talk about it, and or not talk but like to recognize that something has happened and to not brush by it, because I think a lot of schools have missed opportunities for very real talks and very real education with our kids by pretending things are business as usual. We were lucky that we just had a little bit of foresight to practice some routines that were going to be helpful when a major event affected our entire population.
Little did they know a different kind of major event would soon be affecting their entire population, 90% of which is Latino students, many of whom are immigrants. I asked Devon what he and his staff had told his students before the election happened, when then presidential candidate Donald Trump first said that Mexican immigrants are murderers and rapists.
Yeah, and I remember, talking to some kids at lunch, and they're like, Trump's going to be our next president. And I'm like, no, he's not. Don't worry. And,
Yeah. And here we are.
Yeah.
And here we are. You know how this story continues. On November 8th, 2016, the number of people making it out to the polls is not a record turnout, as some expected. And Hillary Clinton didn't have the landslide victory many thought she would. On November 9th, the day after the election, people woke up to what seemed like, for many, a whole new world. But not the rose-colored romance world of Aladdin and Jasmine. I talked to Tony and Sarah about what it felt like at school on November 9th.
When I got to school, basically right after the elections, it was like if somebody came into the school and like shut off all the lights. Everybody was just like in shock mode. Like, we didn't know what happened. For sure, we thought that Hillary was gonna win.
People like to joke about it a lot, saying, oh, well, Trump won. Let me pack my bags and go, like, in a happy way and everything. But we also understand, like, a lot of these people aren't mature enough to, like, comprehend things, or that's their way of taking it in by making jokes out of it. But in this situation, those type of jokes aren't, like, the best thing to do, because, like, it can actually, like, offend other people. But yeah, there's students that took it as a joke or laughed about it, but I don't know if anyone was actually like proud of Trump being the president-elect.
I remember coming in that morning, and on Wednesday mornings we gather around and we kind of talk student interventions. So the whole staff gathers in one room, and then we split off based on who needs to work with a specific kid's plan. And so we stopped and I remember addressing the staff and being like, we've got a lot of work to do. I know that each of us in this room is here to do the work for our kids, and we're going to have some battles to fight.
To be clear, Devon was still in a haze at this point. The news is still sinking in. He hasn't even gotten a chance to talk to the head principal, Ed Mendez. They talked after the meeting and quickly decided that more needed to be said.
We kind of had a real quick pull together, and he was absolutely right. Like, he's like, we need to send out a message to staff, please. Kids are going to be really stressed today. Just don't worry about instruction. Let them talk. Use those circles. We made it a point to just visit a lot of classrooms who were having those conversations. And some classes, students were like, hey, we want to get some work done. But most classes, kids are like, we need to talk. I heard a lot of anger at times, right? I heard some anger. I heard a good bit of fear. I heard some kids who, were talking about like their neighborhoods, and like, why doesn't, I remember one kid was talking about like, my neighborhood never gets what it needs. Why do neighborhoods in richer parts of town look so much nicer when we can't get sidewalks? Stuff like that. And there were a lot of emotions wrapped up in that for students. I also heard other students who were talking about like, this convinces me I need to work even harder, right? And then there were some kids who were like, guys, let's not worry, let's not overreact. But the whole range, like any emotion you could imagine that day coming out of kids, it was there.
Did you see, like, were there cases where you saw kids like sobbing or like crying?
Yeah, we had some crying kids. We had some cussing kids. I probably saw more. I probably heard more anger than I did crime.
It was also the day that Tony was yelled at while waiting for the bus, the story you heard at the beginning of this episode. Tony wasn't having a great day. In one of the classroom discussions, he said he got pretty low.
We had like a little discussion circle, and like we talked about how we, like how we felt and like how we could change. And at that day, I was like being a little negative about things, because my biology teacher, she said, well, we can start with the change. And I told her, Miss, how can we start with a change when every time we try to start with a change, like Martin Luther King got assassinated for trying to stop segregation, but every time we try to movement, they're gonna pick at us and start riots. So I was just being negative that day, but I made it like a real valid point that like she couldn't say anything else,
After school, Devon and the head principal decided to use professional development time for the teachers to listen to one another and to vent their feelings.
So we did with staff, we did a circle. And that wasn't easy because, again, like the same feelings that the kids had, staff had. And there was anger, there was confusion in that room. So we pulled in Gil Guerrero, who was the founder of our system through Guadalupe Centers. And just an amazing, amazing man. He passed away this last year. Kind of whenever we felt confused, I think ever, we pulled him in, we talked to him. Like, even though he stepped aside a few years ago, he still very much has a way of making us aware of the right things to be aware of. But Gil, he's lived it. I mean, he spent his entire life working for civil rights. And the perspective that he brought in that moment of, this is one day in the life of someone who has been working for civil rights of marginalized groups his entire life, and throwing everything he has at is like, we've got more work to do, and we're going to keep doing it, and we were going to have more work to do anyways, because we're not there, so we're going to keep going. It was powerful and it was encouraging. Then the next day, we could not have planned things as well as they happened. Okay. So we had a teacher who did some work at the very beginning of the school year to figure out where all of our kids, what nationalities they represented.
The teacher was Isao Asugo. I ended up talking with him briefly, but didn't get a chance to record. It started as an accident, sort of. Mr. Asugo wanted to get a flag to represent each of the 4 different nationalities represented in the students that came into his classroom each day. So he ordered the flags online, and when they arrived, he realized he had accidentally ordered full-size, that's 6 foot by 4 foot, flags. There was no way he could fit them in his classroom. So he talked with other teachers and administration about maybe hanging them in the hallways, which he knew would mean he would need to find out what other nationalities were represented in the school. And then someone recommended he get flags for the various immigrant staff as well, so it kind of snowballed. The countries: Bangladesh, Guatemala, Syria, El Salvador, Panama, Honduras, Ecuador, Cuba, Mexico, Pakistan, Somalia, Peru, and the United States. 13 countries.
They had actually planned to do that assembly that Thursday. Wow. And I'm really glad they had, because there's no way that I could have planned something that was as beautiful as that. And we recognized that we just needed to have the whole school there for it.
Here's Sarah talking about the assembly.
And the assembly was a really nice moment to live, because we were all feeling the same thing in that moment. We all had the same fear of and same questions of Trump being the president-elect. but we all basically came together as a community because we actually understood each other's like doubts of Trump being in office. We held flags of other countries to show one another that we are like supporting each other, and then we also held up posters to all the women you're respected here, to all the Mexicans, we know you're not drug dealers, to all the Muslims, you're not terrorists, and all those posters gave a message that Trump has given and said the opposite of it and showed like comfort to the students.
These signs, delivering a counter-narrative to Trump's fear-laden messages, are still hanging at Alta Vista. They were Mr. Suga's idea. They're still in the cafeteria as a daily reminder to the students that Alta Vista is a safe place. In addition to the signs Sarah mentioned, another says, Black students. In this school, your life matters. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. Another reads, undocumented students. In this school, we will not build walls. And LGBTQ students, you were born perfect. You are welcome here. I took a picture of the signs. You can see them in the show notes for this episode at our website.
And also, individuals share their story about how they felt. And I was one of those students that went up to talk, and I shared my story because I'm not really scared of like what could happen to me or my parents. I'm more scared of what could happen with my brother because my brother has autism. So even though he's born here and has like more advantage for a lot of things that we do, his medical condition like worries us in case like if we get deported or something, what could happen to him.
I thought this was really telling that she wasn't so much concerned about herself, but her brother. She realized that the people hurt most by oppressive policies are those that are the most vulnerable. In this case, someone with a developmental disability.
There were a number of schools around the area that had a lot more discipline incidents those days. And I think largely you see discipline incidents when students don't feel relaxed or don't feel at ease. When there's anxiety, more stuff happens. I think we had about maybe that next week, and I didn't want to jinx it, but I commented, and I was like, I think in the next week I didn't see anybody in the office for any discipline issues, because it was kind of this, community solidarity feeling that happened. It was powerful, and I think it's still there. I think that the real challenge to the work is not how do you feel right after something happens, but how do we continue to make our children, our students feel loved, feel supported.
I think this says a lot about the power of creating safe space that they had 0 student incidents after the assembly. So separately, I asked Devon, Tony, and Sarah to reflect on the political climate. Here's Devon.
I think it's troubling when kids are scared of our leadership. And we have got to do some serious reflection. When kids are scared of our leadership, whether it's municipal, state, or federal, we as a society need to do some serious reflection on how did we get to that state and what does that say about who we are.
After all this, I never seen like, like so much love happening around the world now. Because before this guy came into the president house, like people were so divided, you know? But I'm seeing that things are like, I see whites, blacks, and browns as in coming together and as in supportment to say like, look, you guys aren't alone. We aren't gonna let you guys get discriminated like that. And I see a little bit of unification there. Honestly, what I think, Trump just needs to be a little bit more open-minded.
And Sarah showed a measure of compassion and empathy towards Trump voters that I've been hard-pressed to muster against my own anger and disillusionment from what happened in November. She left me sort of speechless.
Even I recognize that Trump has promised like a good change, that if I weren't immigrant, I would actually have voted for him too, because he promised a change, and that's something a lot of people want. And but it's also like a scary process of how he wants to change. But I kind of understand why they voted for him. But his idea is actually good. His idea is actually nice. Like, he wants to make America work again, and that's a good idea. Like, but also the way he's doing it isn't the best way. Like, getting like immigrants that are getting low-paid jobs and like making them leave the country or something. That's not the best way. But other than that, his idea is smart, but not in the way he's doing it. We're all selfish, and like every human is selfish. And when we see Hillary and Trump, we go for what benefits us. And a lot of people saw a change in the economy. A lot of people saw a chance for them to work again and everything. So they went for their instinct and said, oh, Trump is the best choice for me. And probably a lot of people did vote for Trump for immigrants or Muslims or something. But I wouldn't I don't get mad at the fact that they voted for him because they voted for Trump or anything. It's just sad the people that voted for him because they want us out of here. And that's the thing about this, that they probably overlooked all the racist things that Trump said and picked him for the change that he promised. Just like us, that we overlooked all the change he promised, but we saw all the racist things he said.
Damn. Well, I'm Nathaniel Bozarth, and this has been a highly political episode of Wide Ruled, Brainroot's podcast on the past and present of equality in education. Check out the show notes for this episode at our website at brainroot.tv/wide-ruled-podcast. If you feel like this story was an important story to tell, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes. If you'd like to support Wide Ruled, because right now I'm using a sock as a pop filter for my microphone, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/wide-ruled-podcast, where you can support us by pledging a few bucks for every episode we turn out. And finally, if you have ideas for stories or comments, please email us at wideruledpodcast@brainroot.tv. Wide Ruled is produced by myself in conjunction with executive producer Christopher Cook. Music for today's episode comes from Black Ant. Thanks for listening.